Hello and good morning. My name is Melanie Powers, and I am going to be presenting on integrative pedagogical approaches in education. This is for Counseling 812. Um, the class is specifically called Instructional Theory and Methodology Seminar under the direction of Professor Dr. Justin Adams. Um, and let's get right into it. So, I have some learning objectives for you. The first one is that learners will be able to define integrative pedagogy, describe its differences from other pedagogies, identify how integrative pedagogy incorporates real world experiences into learning. The second is learners will be able to compare Dr. Robin Fogarty's 10 models for integrating curriculum and be able to apply those models to the context of counseling curriculum. Finally, learners will be able to identify and describe their current approaches, thoughts, and feelings toward curriculum development, lesson planning, and or pedagogy, and reflect on their strengths, weaknesses, and capabilities of each. So, first things first, we want to be able to understand what exactly is integrative pedagogy. How do we define that? I think it's important to understand integrative pedagogy in context with other pedagogies. So I've selected a video for us to watch that will give you an idea of a few other educational approaches to pedagogy in addition to integrative pedagogy. I want you to pay particular attention to the integrative approach because we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about what it is and how the approach to integrative pedagogy differs a bit from the video versus what Dr. Fogarty defines how we can approach curriculum from an integrated perspective. So let's be mindful of that as we watch our video.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Teaching Partner. Today we are going to explore the concept of pedagogy and dive into five major pedagogical approaches. And I would like to share real life examples to illustrate each one. So, pedagogy refers to the art and science of teaching. It encompasses the strategies, techniques, and methods that educators use to facilitate learning. Pedagogy is not just about imparting knowledge, it's about creating an environment where students can engage with the material and develop a deeper understanding of the subject matter. So, let's discuss five major pedagogical approaches. Number one, constructivist approach. The constructivist approach is based on the idea that learners construct their own understanding and knowledge of the world through experiencing things and reflecting on those experiences. When teachers implement a constructive approach, they encourage students to use active techniques to create more knowledge and then to reflect on and talk about what they are doing and how their understanding is changing. For example, a science teacher might ask students to design their own experiments to understand the principle of physics. Students are actively involved in their learning as they hypothesize, experiment, and then discuss their findings. Number two, collaborative approach. Collaborative learning is an educational approach involving groups of learners working together to solve a problem, complete a task, or create a product. This approach is founded on the idea that learning is a naturally social act in which the participants talk among themselves. For example, in a language class, students might work in groups to write and perform a play in the language they are learning. This not only helps them practice the language but also teaches teamwork and problem solving. Number 3, integrative approach. The integrative approach involves creating a learning environment that helps students make connections across the curriculum, integrating knowledge from different disciplines. This approach can help students see the bigger picture and understand how different areas of knowledge intersect. For example, a project that requires students to calculate the cost of materials for a school event can integrate math, economics, and practical life skills. Number 4, reflective approach. In the reflective approach, students are encouraged to think about their own learning process and to evaluate their own progress. This can help them become more aware of their learning styles and strategies and make adjustments to improve their understanding. For example, after completing a writing assignment, students might be asked to write a reflection on their strategies they used, what they found challenging, and what they could do differently next time. Finally, inquiry based learning. Inquiry based learning is a dynamic and student centered approach to education that is rooted in asking questions, problem solving, and exploratory learning. Teachers guide the process, but the students are at the center of the learning, actively involved in exploring the material. For example, in the history class, rather than simply lecturing about historical events, a teacher might present students with a historical problem and ask them to research and present their findings on possible causes and effects. In conclusion, pedagogy is a critical component of effective teaching and learning. By understanding and applying these approaches, teachers can create a rich learning environment that encourages students to engage deeply with the material and develop a lifelong love of learning. So that's all for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this video is very useful for you. So thank you very much. If you have any question, query, or you need any support for making a decision, don't hesitate to write an email to the teachingpartner@gmail.com.
Okay, thanks so much for hanging in there with me with that video. I hope that you got a better understanding of quite a few different educational approaches, including and especially the integrative pedagogical approach. Um, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about that video before we move on to the rest of our presentation. But integrative approaches were really once primarily used in academically or intellectually gifted or AIG programs. So, in the state of North Carolina, if you are familiar with K 12 public school education, you'll be likely a little more familiar with the AIG programs. So, integrative approaches were once primarily used in AIG programs, but Dr. Robin Fogarty, who we'll get to know a little bit later in this presentation, um, purports that integrative approaches really can be used across the board throughout K 12 education and on up through collegiate or graduate education as well. Um, we're going to talk about an article or a work, seminal work that she has produced that supports that even integrative approaches are used in exceptional children's courses as well. And so it's a very inclusive approach to pedagogy. And so I just want us to be mindful of that. Also, the key idea is that integrative approaches are really intended to be supportive in terms of holistic learning. And you kind of saw some of this in the integrative pedagogical approach portion of the video that we just watched. But it's learning that really brings concepts to life through the application of, really, according to Dr. Fogarty, more than just uh, multiple disciplines. It could actually bring concepts to life for students through the application of one discipline or a combination of multiple disciplines. Um, the key here is that the video that you watched, it really latched on to the idea that integrative approaches in education are designed to be multidisciplinary in nature, which, according to Dr. Fogarty, might not always be the case. So I want you to really notice that distinction and that difference in definition from the teaching partners video that we just watched. Because again, many people think that integrative pedagogy is about multidisciplinary learning of subjects only, but Dr. Fogarty disagrees, and she purports that integrative teaching can really fall within one discipline and many topics or multiple disciplines, and that integrative learning can be intrinsically motivated as well. And it can also be externally influenced. And she really discusses this in one of her most famous works, which is called The 10 Ways to Integrate Curriculum. And we're going to explore that work in depth today. But first things first, we need to know who we are talking about when we mention the name Dr. Robin Fogarty. So, Dr. Fogarty is, number one, an educator. She has taught K 12 through collegiate level education. She is an author of multiple books, a consultant, and she's known for her work in curriculum integration. And she's done many, many presentations and again written several or authored several books on curriculum and instruction, especially for integrated learning. And again, she's most known for her work on the 10 ways to integrate curriculum, which again we'll be exploring today. Right, so let's get right into it. So, Dr. Fogarty borrows from an individual named Emerson a quote, which I'll share with you. To the young mind, everything is individual, stands by itself. By and by, it finds how to join two things and see in them one nature, then three, then 3,000, discovering roots running underground, whereby contrary and remote things cohere and flower out from one stem. The astronomer discovers the geometry. A pure abstraction of the human mind is the measure of planetary motion. The chemist finds proportions and intelligible method throughout matter. And science is nothing but the finding of analogy, identity, in the most remote parts. So, in Dr. Fogarty's 10 Ways to Integrate Curriculum, she really narrows that particular quote down and likens it to the process of an educator educating a learner. And her point is, by using that quote, is that education essentially is like a tree, and there are roots that are seen and unseen the deeper you go into the ground. But there's also a stem that started that tree or began that tree, which helped it to grow into the trunk and the branches and the leaves. And the idea is that educators are supposed to really help learners to be able to recognize the stem so that they can transition into this expansive learning that incorporates all the many different roots and all the different branches and leaves of the tree. This concept is really the process of integrated learning. So, there are a few different ways that Dr. Fogarty presents in her 10 Ways to Integrate Curriculum work that, again, I consider a seminal work that represent how educators can help students do that, or how learners can integrate curriculum themselves, interestingly enough. And so she has a few different processes, starting with number one, exploration, which begins with a single discipline. So Dr. Fogarty again believes that integrative learning can occur within a single discipline. She also believes that, similar to what many other people believe, integrated learning can occur across several disciplines. So that's kind of what we're used to hearing about integrated learning being multidisciplinary, um, or in some cases, like multi approach related, multi pedagogical approach related. She also purports that um, there can actually be integrated curriculum with regard to learners activating that within themselves from an intrinsic standpoint. And then similarly, learners are able to activate that type of integrated learning across networks of other learners as well. So we're going to explore each of those subcategories today and the associated models with each of those categories. And then afterwards, we'll take just a few of the models and connect those back to counselor education. So, first things first, let's start with within single disciplines. So, the first model is the fragmented model, which views curriculum through a periscope. It's one of the things that I like about Dr. Fogarty is that she explains each model from the perspective of a looking glass. And so the fragmented model, again, is a way that you view curriculum through a periscope. So this is the most traditional approach to curriculum development. And it's basically a traditional model of separate and distinct disciplines, which fragments the subject areas. So, for example, a teacher might apply the view in math, science, social studies, language arts, or sciences, humanities, fine arts, and practical arts. So, this is kind of like what we are likely most used to seeing. um, if you've gone to public school in the United States, or specifically North Carolina, you're probably used to um, seeing or experiencing a fragmented model. Um, Secondly, we have the connected model, which Dr. Fogarty connects this integrated curriculum through an opera glass. So when I think of looking through an opera glass, I think of sitting way high in the nosebleed section or in like the balcony and being able to use the opera glasses to see something that's really far away on stage. It helps me to see it up close. And that's exactly what the connected model is about, up close and detailed about one discipline. Okay. As an example, a teacher relates the concept of fractions to decimals, which in turn relates to money and grades. So within each subject area, course content is connected topic to topic and concept to concept, and one year's work to the next, and it relates ideas explicitly. Okay. Now we have the nested model. So for the nested model, we are comparing that to a three-dimensional lens. And so it's basically an educator offering a lesson inside of a lesson. So within each subject area, the teacher really targets multiple skills. So it could be social skills, or thinking skills, and content specific skills. And the teacher designs the unit, for example, on, let's say, photosynthesis to simultaneously target consensus seeking, which is the social skill, or sequencing, which is the thinking skill, and then finally the plant life cycle, which is the science content. So these are Dr. Fogarty's examples, which are very specific to um, K 12 education, and some of them are going to branch off into graduate level education, and we'll see that later. Next, let's get into across several disciplines. So, what it means to integrate curriculum across several different disciplines. So, the first model that we'd use to do that, or could use to do that, would be the sequenced model, which we're comparing that type of curriculum. We're viewing it through the perspective of eyeglasses. So, your lenses are separate entities, but they're connected by a common frame. So, topics or units of study are rearranged and sequenced to coincide with one another, and similar ideas are taught in concert while remaining separate subjects. As an example, an English teacher presents a historical novel depicting a particular period, while the history teacher teaches the same historical period. That's an example of the sequenced model. For a shared model, we're looking at curriculum from the perspective of binoculars. So we're bringing two distinct disciplines together into a single, more focused image. Okay. So binoculars, in essence, they're looking in terms of the shared model at two disciplines that share overlapping concepts and skills. So, as an example, science and math teachers use data collection, charting, and graphing as shared concepts that can be team taught. Then we have the webbed model, which we're looking at the curriculum through a telescope. So we are, in that case, trying to capture the entire constellation of disciplines at once. So it's a broad view of an entire constellation as one thing webbed to the various elements. So, for example, a teacher might present a simple topical theme, like the circus, for example, and they may web it to other subject areas. A conceptual theme, such as a conflict, can be webbed for more depth in the theme approach. And so the biggest thing with the webbed model is that you're essentially have this really rich thing that is webbed like a spider web to other curriculum content and disciplines or subjects, and you use that particular theme to really sift through or sift out appropriate content concepts and topics and ideas. The integrated model. So we're looking at curriculum with regard to an integrated model through the eyes of a a kaleidoscope. These are interdisciplinary topics that are rearranged around concepts. So the biggest thing is that new patterns and designs that are used for the basic elements of each discipline. So it matches subjects for overlaps in topics and concepts, with some team teaching in an authentic integrated model. As an example, in math, science, social studies, fine arts, and language arts, and practical arts, teachers look for patterning models and approach content through these patterns. And then the threaded model. So we're viewing curriculum through a magnifying glass. So we're looking at the big ideas, and they are enlarged throughout all content with a meta-curricular approach. So the metacurricular approach really threads thinking skills and social skills and multiple intelligences, technology and study skills through the various disciplines. So, as an example, teaching staff can target predictions in reading, math, and science lab experiences, while social studies teachers target forecasting current events and thus threads the skills or patterns across the disciplines. So now we're shifting gears and we're getting into how we can integrate curriculum within learners. So, meaning this is something, again, how we talked about earlier, something that learners can do intrinsically that really does not require as much outside influence. It's something that they can drive on their own. And we do that through the immersed model. So, a person using the immersed model views the curriculum through a microscope. So they filter all the content through the lens of interest and expertise. So this is where we start to talk about graduate level work. So it's an intensely personal view that allows microscopic explanation as all content is filtered through the lens of interest and expertise. So the disciplines become part of the learner's lens of expertise, and the learner filters all content through this lens and becomes immersed in his or her own experience. Dr. Fogarty provides her example. A student or doctoral candidate has an area of expertise and interest and sees all learning through that lens. Last but certainly not least, we are looking at integrating curriculum across networks of learners. And so to do that, you'd use the network model, which is viewed in terms of curriculum through a prism. So you're creating multiple dimensions and directions of focus. So learners filter all learning through the expert's eyes and makes internal connections that lead to external networks or experts in related fields. For example, an architect, while adapting to certain technology programs like CAD or CAM, networks with technical programmers and expands her knowledge base just as she had traditionally done with interior designers. Okay. So it's that community of support, that community of learning that comes from a network model. So, Dr. Robin Fogarty has authored another book, The Mindful School: How to Integrate the Curricula, which exemplifies in this figure one how to integrate the curriculum. And so you see all of the different subcategories represented by pictures, the within single disciplines, across several disciplines, and within and across learners. So, we've talked a lot about Dr. Fogarty and her thoughts on the ways that you can integrate curriculum. And we've talked a bit about integrative pedagogy in general, and we've defined it. We've looked at how it compares to other pedagogical approaches. And so now we really want to transition to talking about how some of this content can directly connect to counselor education. And so my hope is that we will walk away with some ideas for reflection that we can consider as we approach our work as educators in the field of counseling. So, starting with the use of the connected model within single disciplines. So, if we think about counseling and we think about certain courses that we offer within our discipline, which is counseling, the connected model again, is that view through an opera glass. We are looking at the up close details, the subtleties, and the interconnections within one discipline. Okay. So, for example, how can we use the connected model in our single discipline counseling? I think about the theories courses that we offer and how connected those courses are to basic skills, basic and advanced skills in counseling. I think about one of my favorite theorists, Carl Rogers, who is very closely associated with person centered or client centered counseling, and how many of the basic skills that we learn in counseling come from Carl Rogers. For example, empathy, warmth, genuineness, authenticity, all those attending skills. I think about reflection of feeling, content, and meaning, just listening, active listening skills. Those things can be directly correlated to some of the most foundational theories in our field, those skills. And so I also think about how we can connect solution focused brief therapy and how we, in our theories classes, talk about that theory, and we talk about when it was founded and who it was founded by, and maybe why it was founded, and maybe some techniques that are associated with it. And how often do we connect those techniques or skills with our skills courses intentionally in an integrated way, such as, asking the miracle question, for example. So that brings me to thinking about ethics courses. Our ethics courses or ethics and orientation courses, and how we talk so much about ethical codes and legality. In some ethical courses or ethics courses, we may even go over the general statutes for a state, or I'm going to use North Carolina as an example. The North Carolina General Statutes or the Licensed Clinical Mental Health Care Act. We may go over the ACA code. Um, but how often do we go over the business side of counseling with ethics? How often do we go over the actual licensing process for students post graduation and what that looks like? How often do we connect in our ethics courses when we talk about scope of practice and the ethical reasoning behind understanding and navigating scope of practice, and connect that to the business side of it with niching and what it means to ethically toe the line between understanding scope of practice, making referrals, and defining a niche successfully as a business person, as a solo private practitioner. How often do we talk about ethics when it comes to representing ourselves accurately and combining that with marketing in business and as a solo practitioner, and what that means to toe the line between actually representing yourself, obviously, as you're supposed to, from an ethical standpoint in counseling, and marketing yourself appropriately. How do those two things connect? How do they differ? What does that look like? What are the implications of those types of things? So, those are just things to think about, how we can really get into the details and the interconnectedness of counseling while still incorporating natural subjects that still are relevant and fall within our discipline, however, are just talked about perhaps less often. Next, we have the use of the sequenced model. So this one is falling under the integrated curriculum across several disciplines. But we want to talk about it again from specifically counseling related subjects. So when we're thinking about the sequenced model, again, this is us looking at curriculum through eyeglasses. Okay, so units are taught separately, but they're rearranged in sequence to provide a broad framework for related concepts. So in counseling, teachers also or educators also have the ability to arrange those topics similarly to coincide. But notice that takes partnership across curriculum, across departments, across our field, essentially. So, as an example, I think about how a theories professor might present theoretical orientations in historical order and work in tandem with a multicultural counseling professor to teach multiculturally related historical events that are relevant to multicultural counseling in the same historical order as the theories professor. And this helps students to solidify why certain events that were happening in counseling were happening at a given time. It helps them understand the decision making of the theorist or the decision making of our advocates in multicultural counseling of that time or of that past historical period. And that solidifies learning and brings, again, that real life experience to students to help them solidify that learning. Next, we have the use of an immersed model. So, within learner approach to counseling integrated curriculum. So, again, the immersed model is where Dr. Fogarty really hones in on the experience of graduate students and particularly doctoral students. So, borrowing her example, I think about a counseling doctoral student who's really intrinsically motivated by, for example, cross methods research. Essentially, they're going to end up intrinsically integrating their own learning due to their need to also understand computer science. Because if they're doing mixed methods research, they're going to be driven to learn subjects and disciplines outside of counseling, okay, such as computer science by way of learning systems like R or SPSS so that they can actually fulfill the requirement of their degree and meet the expectation of their experiment with regard to their cross methods research that they're focused on. And remember, the immersed model of integration views the curriculum through a microscope. So it is personal, it is motivated intrinsically, and it's driven through the lens of interest and expertise. Okay. So this is something that takes place, this process takes place within learners, and it happens with little or no outside intervention. Okay. Last but certainly not least, we have the use of a networked model. So, this is integrating curriculum across the networks of learners in related fields. So, as an example, I took a multicultural counseling course at the doctoral level and took it under a great professor who introduced myself and other classmates to a topic that we had never heard of before, which was about the Great Dismal Swamp, which was essentially focused on the Marinage Formation, which is essentially people who formed communities and they were escaped enslaved people. And they formed those communities along the Great Dismal Swamp, which I believe spans across parts of North Carolina and Virginia. It was an excellent lesson. And I learned a lot through that lesson. And that particular professor, through his own network, introduced our class to another professor and another author, Dr. Marcus Nevius, who has done extensive research on the Great Dismal Swamp and the background of the Petit Marinage community. Now, to really and truly, that is a pure example of the network model of integration. Because again, we're viewing curriculum from a network model through a prism, which you're creating multiple dimensions and directions of focus. So, this is like Dr. Fogarty says a 3 or 4 way conference call, and it provides various avenues of exploration and explanation. Now, we can take this a step further. I asked a question during that class where we had Dr. Nevius, our guest speaker, there to talk about this subject. I asked a question related to archaeology, and Dr. Nevius was able to answer that archaeological question and pointed me in the direction of several other specialists and expertise in archaeology and in historical records, state historical records that could support his understanding of that and my question about it. And so, what that could have looked like is me continuing that network model by reaching out to, let's say, Dr. Daniel Sayers, who led the archaeological digs in the Great Dismal Swamp, and so on and so forth with all the other individuals within the network who are specialists and expertise on the subject. So you see how counseling can be relatable to really many different disciplines outside of other, even healthcare disciplines like social work or psychology, um, or marriage and family therapy. Our knowledge base can be relatable to archaeology. It could be relatable to history. It is relatable to all of those things because all of those things matter when it comes to the way that we understand the world and the way that we teach in counseling. So, that being said, I want to offer you an opportunity to professionally reflect. I have a series of questions that I'm going to ask that I want you to think about, which you can do now or later, that I hope will give you some food for thought about some of the information that you've received today and incite change or at least depth of thought around how you currently practice within counselor education. So, the first question is, what pedagogical approaches do I currently subscribe to? What thoughts and feelings do I have toward curriculum development? Lesson planning, the general use of pedagogy. What strengths, weaknesses, and capabilities do I have in each of the above mentioned areas? And could integrating my curriculum support my approach to teaching and learning? Why or why not? These are my references for the presentation. And I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to present this information. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach me at the contact information on screen. Thank you, and I hope you have a fabulous week.